Imagine the U.S. Senate chamber, a place built on ceremony, tradition, and power. The cameras roll, the microphones capture every breath, and senators posture like gladiators in suits. Among them stands Senator Ted Cruz, a man known for his sharp tongue, his relentless questioning, and his ability to turn hearings into a theater of humiliation. But this time, Cruz thought he had an easy target, a young African leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old head of state of Burkina Faso. In Washington, many dismiss leaders from the global south as weak, unprepared, or easy prey for rhetorical ambushes. Cruz was certain he could expose Traoré, corner him with tough questions, and paint him as a puppet of Russia, China, or worse, an enemy of democracy. What Cruz didn't anticipate was that Traoré would respond with words so sharp, so direct, that the entire room fell silent. Before we get into that explosive moment, we need context. Because this clash was never about two men, it was about two worlds colliding. For decades, the United States has positioned itself as the global referee of democracy, deciding who deserves legitimacy and who doesn't. African nations, despite their sovereignty, have often been treated like pawns in a larger geopolitical chess game. Washington has military bases scattered across the continent. It funds stability programs, and it often threatens sanctions. When leaders refuse to align with U.S. foreign policy, Burkina Faso, a small West African nation, has been at the center of this storm. Plagued by terrorism, struggling with poverty, and facing constant meddling from former colonial powers like France, the country has endured coups, instability, and endless promises of help from the West, help that rarely arrives without strings attached. Enter Ibrahim Traoré. In 2022, he took power after a coup, and unlike many leaders before him, he spoke openly, fearlessly, about ending French dominance, cutting ties with exploitative contracts, and reclaiming African dignity. He declared that Burkina Faso would fight terrorism on its own terms. Without bowing to Paris or Washington, he became a symbol of resistance, not just in his country but across the continent. That defiance put him on Washington's radar, and when he arrived in the U.S. to attend a high-level dialogue, Ted Cruz seized the opportunity. The senator leaned in, his voice dripping with condescension. He framed Traoré's government as illegitimate. He accused him of aligning with authoritarian regimes, of silencing dissent, of betraying democratic values. It was classic. Cruz reduced complex realities into sound bites that could go viral, portraying himself as the defender of Western ideals. But Traoré didn't flinch. Instead of dodging, instead of playing polite, he leaned forward, looked Cruz straight in the eye, and delivered a reply that cut through decades of Western arrogance. He said, "Senator, you speak of democracy as if it belongs to America. But in Africa, we have buried millions of our people because of your so-called democracy. We've watched as your allies pillaged our resources, armed our enemies, and called it partnership. If defending our land makes us undemocratic in your eyes, then so be it. We will never again be slaves, not to France, not to America, not to anyone." The chamber went quiet. Cruz, usually quick with a comeback, found none. Why? Because Traoré had done what few dared. He exposed the hypocrisy of American foreign policy in plain language. He forced the Senate, and by extension the American public, to confront an uncomfortable truth that the U.S. talks about freedom while practicing domination. This wasn't just a heated exchange. It was symbolic of a shifting global order. Think about it. For decades, U.S. politicians could lecture African leaders with impunity. But now leaders like Traoré refuse to play the role of submissive students in America's classroom of democracy. They are rewriting the script, asserting that their nations have the right to chart their own destiny. And here's the irony. While Cruz painted Traoré as anti-democratic, back in Burkina Faso, the young captain enjoys massive grassroots support. Thousands rally behind him because they see him not as a tyrant, but as a liberator, someone finally willing to stand up to the West. Compare that to Cruz, whose approval ratings in his own country swing wildly depending on the season, and you begin to see the contrast. The clash revealed something deeper than a personal rivalry. It revealed a fault line in global politics. The West's old playbook of moral superiority is losing its power. The global South is no longer afraid to speak truth to Washington. And the silence in that chamber, it wasn't just awkward, it was historic. Because when Ibrahim Traoré finished speaking, he didn't just answer Ted Cruz. He spoke for every nation tired of being lectured, exploited, and dismissed. He spoke for those who believe that sovereignty is not a privilege granted by Washington but a right, earned through struggle, sacrifice, and blood. Let's pause for a moment and reflect on what makes this so powerful. Traoré is not a polished diplomat with decades of experience in Western institutions. He's a soldier, a man who rose from the battlefield to the presidency in one of the world's toughest environments. He speaks plainly, directly, without the rehearsed spin of a career politician. And that authenticity is exactly why his words hit so hard. Contrast that with Cruz, a man who has spent years perfecting sound bites, crafting viral moments, and grandstanding for partisan audiences. His strength is in rhetoric, but rhetoric collapses when it faces raw, lived reality. And that's why this moment matters. Because it wasn't just about who won the argument, it was about who represented truth. Cruz wanted to humiliate Traoré. Instead, he humiliated himself. And as the silence stretched across the chamber, one truth became undeniable. The world is changing, and Washington can no longer assume it will always have the last word. So what happens next? The exchange between Cruz and Traoré is not just a viral clip, it's a preview of the future. Because what we are witnessing is the crumbling of an old order and the rise of a new one. For decades, Western powers believed they could dictate terms to Africa. They wrote the contracts, controlled the resources, and set the political agenda. But leaders like Traoré are tearing up that script. They are building alliances with whoever respects their sovereignty, whether that's Russia, China, Turkey, or even regional African powers. And here's the catch. Washington hates this not because of democracy, but because of control. When Cruz talks about values, what he really means is leverage. A Burkina Faso that refuses French military bases, rejects US lectures, and signs mining deals on its own terms is a threat not to democracy, but to Western dominance. That's why Traoré's reply was so devastating. He stripped away the polite mask and exposed the core issue: respect. Or more accurately, the lack of it. African nations are no longer begging for approval. They're demanding partnerships based on equality, and that scares Washington more than any coup or crisis. Now let's be clear, Traoré is not a saint. Like any leader, he will face criticism. His government will have challenges, mistakes, and contradictions. But the principle he articulated, the right of his people to decide their own path, resonates. Far beyond Burkina Faso, it echoes across Mali, Niger, Guinea, and beyond. And the silence after his reply, that silence was more than embarrassment. It was the sound of the old narrative breaking. Because for once, an African leader didn't shrink under pressure. He didn't apologize. He didn't play into the trap of Western guilt. He stood tall, spoke with conviction, and reminded the world that Africa is not a child waiting for permission. It is a continent rising. That's why this moment matters to you, the viewer. Because mainstream media will never show you this side of the story. They will spin it as authoritarian defiance or dangerous populism. They will tell you Traoré embarrassed himself. Not Cruz, but the raw footage. The raw silence tells the truth. And if we're being honest, the reason you're watching this channel is because you already know the mainstream narrative is broken. You don't come here for sugar-coated versions of reality. You come here for unfiltered analysis, for the moments that reveal how power really works. So here's the takeaway. Ted Cruz tried to humiliate Ibrahim Traoré. He failed, and in failing, he revealed the weakness of America's old posture. The days of unquestioned lectures are over. The world is entering a multipolar era, and voices like Traoré's are only going to get louder. The only question left is, will Washington adapt, or will it cling to arrogance until it loses everything? And now I want to hear from you. What did you think of Traoré's reply? Do you believe Africa is finally breaking free from Western dominance? Or do you think Washington will find new ways to tighten its grip? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If this breakdown gave you perspective you won't find anywhere else, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, spread it. Let more people see the other side of the story. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because this channel isn't just about news, it's about truth power and the stories the mainstream refuses to tell. Until next time, stay sharp, stay awake, and never stop questioning.